mean, you could literally just tell from meeting the guy, walking in there, that this was a bookstore that was all about the joy of reading, about the joy of learning, about the joy of education. It was an epic place to shoot some video. And in today's video, we're talking about personal knowledge management systems. Sounds really geeky. It is a little bit. I love this stuff. But in today's video, it's all about how to become an educated, continuous learning, cultivated manager. In my line of work, I meet lots and lots of managers, loads of them, hundreds of them. The manager who is probably the hardest to coach, to teach, to train, to work with is the manager who thinks he or she already knows everything. They think they're complete. They think they're the finished article, that everything is already here. The problem is, it's not. We've got to keep learning. The world is shifting fast. We've got to keep moving. We've got to keep educating ourselves. The manager who learns is the manager who you want to work with. So the whole topic of this video today is all about how to build a knowledge management system. So here's the thing, there's a lot of managers who do read a lot of stuff and then they can verbalize this stuff back. They can theorize, they can quote things, they can talk about how other people have done things, but they're not able to implement it themselves. They wing it with confidence. Their influence comes from output, but it's short-lived. Long-term influence comes from long-term contribution, long-term output. So cultivated management's all about taking stuff that you're learning, taking stuff that you're reading, taking stuff that you're introspecting, taking stuff that you're studying, and then putting it into action. So how do you do that? You do that by using that information, by accommodating it, by assimilating it, by adding it to your existing experience, and hopefully by then changing your behaviors. So what I'm going to share with you is my own personal knowledge management system. Now there's a clue in the title here, it's a personal system. It works for me. Hopefully it'll work for you too, but at least hopefully you're going to be inspired to go away and work on your own personal knowledge management system. In today's world where we get access to all sorts of information, it's really easy just to rely on a quick search on the internet to find the answer to something. But information in action is knowledge. That's what we're trying to build here. We're trying to take what we learn, we try to take what we're studying, what's interesting, what's relevant to us, and we try to implement it. Because when we implement it and we try it and we contribute it, we learn what does or doesn't work for us. We find the flaws in it. Because after all, when you're reading a book on management, you're reading one person's perspective on something that has worked. Will it work for you? Maybe. Let's give it a go. Let's try it. Let's learn from it. The only way you're going to do that is if you have a proper system in place for learning. A little bit geeky, going to get a little bit detailed. We're going to share some tools on how to manage your personal knowledge management system, but I'm going to break it down into 4 simple to understand parts. So what are the 4 parts? The 4 parts are capture, curate, crunch, contribute, and they all begin with a C. Of course, it's cultivated management. Part 1 is all about capture. Now capturing is about gathering information, it's about reading, it's about going to conferences, it's about doodles and notes and images and YouTube searches, it's about gathering the information. And bear in mind at this point it's just information, you've not done anything with this. So for example, let's say you're at a conference, there's a really good talk, you're doodling down a whole load of ideas, that's capture. Let's say you're on a web page, it's looking good, you want to capture that web page. You want to capture notes, you want to capture insights, observations. So how do you do this? Obviously if you're on the web, there's all sorts of web clipping tools to actually capture that information. Notepads, books, whatever, post-it notes, whatever works for you. This is a personal knowledge management system. So whatever tool you're using for capturing, just make sure it's a really good one. It's capturing all of the information, including things like the date, the time, and all the information. So it's kind of referenceable. So you know where you were when you captured that information. Here's a little bit of advice. If you're writing notes, make it 60-day proof. What this means that in 60 days from now, it would still make sense. We've all had that where we're looking at a note in a notebook and we're like, what the heck was that piece of note? Might be an IP address or a quote or something like that. Or just a little doodle of something that came to your mind as something that was inspiring or motivating or that you wanted to put into practice. And you look back at it and you can't remember for the life of you what that thing was. So make it 60 days proof. And 60 days from now, would it still make sense? So date, time, context, information source, all of that good stuff is worth capturing. A lot of the online web clipping tools, they'll do that for you. But obviously if you're at a conference, you want to be writing down the notes, the speaker, maybe their Twitter handle, the web address, all that kind of good stuff so that you can go back to it afterwards. How you capture is entirely up to you, but I will recommend that whatever you do when you capture, it all ends up in a single place. Now the tool that I like to use for this is just simply Apple Notes. It's so convenient, it works really well, it's super searchable. I used to use Evernote. I was an Evernote fanboy for about 15 years, and then really it started to get a bit clunky, and when you had a lot of notes in Evernote, it didn't particularly index particularly well. It took a long time to find things, and it was just starting to slow down and get a little bit sluggish. I moved over to something called Devon Think. So for those that have been sort of following my blog for a few years, you'll know I talked a lot about Devon Think. Really good, super easy to categorize and index and find things. The problem is it's just a bit clunky to actually access stuff, so I sort of tired of that. I want to get my information quickly. Use what works for you, Google Keep, Evernote, whatever. Tools are almost kind of irrelevant. It's what works for you. So when you've captured it, make sure it's all in one place. That's really important, so you've not got scattered bits of information everywhere. Next up, we're going to curate it. So what does curate mean? Curate means looking through all of the things that you've captured and then asking a few questions. Do you still want this thing? Is it still relevant? Do you still believe in what it was that you read or you watched? You know, have you changed your mind? I like to do this curation process probably once every 2 weeks. I'll go into Apple Notes and I'll have a look at everything that I've, maybe taken a picture of some notebooks. I've got links, I've got all sorts of web capture, and I'll look at it and I'll basically go, do I still want this? Which bits of this do I want? This is a curation process. It can be really tempting with today's modern tools to basically just keep everything, but then why bother? You might as well just go on the internet and do a search for it. The whole point of becoming a knowledgeable manager is taking what information you have and then translating it into what makes sense for you and your context and the problems that you're facing. So this is the curation part. I clip all sorts of stuff that eventually I look at, actually I don't want that anymore. Books, for example, if I'm reading a book on the Kindle, I'll clip all sorts of stuff, but actually when I look back at it, when I do the curation part, I might only want maybe 20-30% of all of the clippings that I've got. So this is the curation part. This is all about looking at it and going, do I still want this? Do I want to process this? Do I want to put in the required effort to make this part of my sort of knowledge, part of my behaviors, part of me as a manager? So curation is really important. During the creation process, I also make sure I add lots of tags if I'm using a tool. I make sure it's really easy to understand from the title so I can look at it and go, oh, that's that note. And this is the part where we're looking and just going, do I still want this? Once you've curated it, now it's time to crunch it. And crunching is about assimilating, it's about accommodating, it's about changing what you think about something based on this new information. So let's say, for example, I've been reading a book on non-verbal communication. Now I teach a lot about non-verbal communication, and every time I read a new article, it might change my mind about something that I've read in the past. There's not an absolute 100% science to non-verbal communication. So maybe I'll read an article and go, actually, that's a bit jarring. That goes against what I've actually been teaching. Do I need to crunch this? Is this still relevant? And if it is, we've done that in the curation process. I'm going to crunch it. I'm going to add it to my learning pack, which we'll talk about in a minute. And I'm going to crunch it. I'm going to make sure that actually now, from now on, this new piece of information becomes part of me, becomes part of what I teach. And it's also becomes part of my knowledge system. So during the crunching, you know what, use whatever works for you, but here's what I do. I have, again, in Apple Notes, I have a note that is entirely dedicated to non-verbal communication. So for example, let's say that I've been studying how you should sit in your seat during a meeting, and I'm suggesting you sit up with your back straight, your palms facing forward, and you're making nice smiley eye contact with people in the room. But let's say there's a piece of evidence that comes in that suggests that's a ridiculous thing to do. So in my note, that's where I say, here we are in meetings, this is how we should sit to give the best impression, to be open, to be a good communicator, to show that you're listening to the person speaking. But this new bit of information comes in and says, don't do that. You need to slouch in your chair. Trust me, this piece of information probably won't be correct, but you slouch in your chair, you don't avoid eye contact, you show that you're not listening, etc., etc. Maybe there's a reason to do that. So what I would do in my Apple Notes is I would then add this piece of information in there. Now I used to use mind maps to do this, but the mind maps became so big and difficult and gnarly and inaccessible basically from anywhere in the world that I moved over to Apple Notes, and I have basically a simple note that's all about note taking, meetings, body language, verbal, eye contact, and I'll have each one of these notes and I'll just add my new stuff to it, removing anything that is now no longer relevant. This is about crunching it. It's about understanding it. It's about making it now part of you. We want to be looking at, do we have multiple pieces of information that contradict each other? Because if that's the case, there's probably a little bit more research that needs. You maybe go away and research both sides of this and say, is it actually true that both pieces can exist, or is one of them actually false? Crunch that information, make it part of you, change your behaviors off the back of it, change the things you're teaching, change the things that you're learning, maybe do some more research. That's the crunch phase. So now we're into the contribution part of the model. This is where good managers, they take what they've captured, curated, crunched, and they contribute it back. Now maybe this is in your team, maybe you've got a new way of running a new team meeting. Let's say it's the first time you've heard an appreciative inquiry meeting, and if you've never run one of those, they're epic fun. We'll do a video on that in the future. If you've never done that before, maybe you've captured this off a web page, maybe it's the one from my own blog, maybe you've then curated and gone, actually this is definitely something I want to add to my repertoire of how to run effective meetings. And then number 3, you've crunched it and gone, actually this is completely different to how I've run a meeting before. Here's the notes on how to do it. I've broken it down into the 4 stages that Rob recommends we do, and then I'm going to contribute. I'm going to run a meeting at work. I'm going to prime my team and say, this is the first time we've done this, so bear with me, I'm learning how to do this. We're going to get the team into the room, we're going to run the session, we're going to reflect on how well it went, we're going to question, was Rob correct? Did an appreciative inquiry deliver the results that Rob reckoned it would do? And then we're going to reflect, we're going to learn, we're going to understand, and then we can tweak it as we move forward, and that goes back through the cycle of crunching it, contributing it. Let's say you've learned something particularly interesting, you've tried it, you've put it into practice, it works really well. Now you could contribute this back to the community. You could do a video, you could do a blog, you could go stand up on stage, contributing what you know back into your teams, to the organizations you work for the industry, for the communities you're part of, is really important. That's how we all grow. It's how we all learn, by people taking stuff, they're capturing it, they're curating it, they're crunching it, and then they're contributing back their own unique perspective on it. That's how we grow. That's how ideas merge. That's how ideas and new things form. It's also what good managers do. It's not about theory. It's not about being able to find it on Google search. It's not about knowing where to find this piece of information in Evernote or Google Notes or whatever it is that you're using. It's about being able to do this as a manager, about your behaviors changing, about being able to consistently deliver this new thing that you've learned. That's contribution. And with that, I hope you're going to adopt the 4-stage process. Of course, come up with your own, discard what wasn't useful, but that's what works for me. So we capture stuff, we then curate it. We're not just hoarding a whole load of stuff off the internet, we're curating it and making sure it's relevant to us. We're then crunching it, we're making it part of us, we're changing our behaviors, we're learning, we're accommodating it and assimilating it. Then we contribute back to society, to our teams, to our ongoing personal development. And with that, hope you've enjoyed this video. If you liked it, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Please tell your friends and share this with your managers. I mean, that's what this blog and this vlog is all about. I'll see you in the next video.